Hey Seamsters, welcome back to the Seam Stream. Happy holidays to all of you. I hope you all had a safe and wonderful holiday. Today we're going to be learning how to make this, the Pinecone Block. It can also be rearranged to make a tree as well, so I'll show you both variations. So you only need two kinds of fabrics for this block today. We're going to head on over to the cutting board and we're going to have some fun today on the Seam Stream. Hi Seamsters, welcome back to the Seam Stream. Today we are making a really simple quilt block. And they're going to be 10 inches square. So if you're going to make a quilt, you can figure out however many you need to have lengthwise and widthwise in order to make the size that you want. And 10-inch squares are pretty easy to work with. And this is an awesome pattern. It's a pine cone that can also be transformed into a tree. So I'll show you both ways of assembling the block. But first, let's talk about the fabric. Today, I am using Lila Boutique's Folklore line made from Moda Fabrics. And it's a wonderful line, very fall-like. And it also reminds me a little bit of the spring. So if you want to make trees or if you want to make pine cones, I think it would work perfect for both seasons. Now, the fabric here, whenever I cut my pieces, I like to label them. I always recommend doing that either by letter or by number, depending on the quilt that you're making or your preference. And that way it keeps you organized when you go to piece it together, okay? So I have my pieces here as A, B, C, and D. And then I also have a background fabric, but I'm not going to label that because I don't really need to right now. Unless you want to label that, you can, and you can use E, F, and G because we're cutting our background fabric into 3 different sizes. So real simple, okay? Everything is being cut at 2.5-inch strips. So if you know what that means, yes, a jelly roll will work. So you can go ahead and grab that jelly roll you have sitting on your counter or run to the store if you want to and pick up that jelly roll that you've just been wanting to get because this is the perfect quilt for that. Even though it's pine cone or tree, it's not really a festive quilt, so it really works for all seasons. So let's talk background fabric first. Your background fabric, you want to cut out 10 2.5-inch squares for this one block. Okay, we're talking one block only, not full quilt size, because that's going to depend on whatever quilt you're making at this time. But we're going to use 10 2.5-inch squares. From the background fabric, I also want you to cut out 4 1.5 by 2.5-inch rectangles. So you've already gotten your 2.5-inch strip, just cut 1.5-inch rectangles. Then I also want you to go ahead and I want you to make 2 of the 2.5-inch strips into 2.5 by 3.5-inch rectangles. So from your background fabric, you should have a total of 10 2.5-inch squares, 4 2.5 by 1.5-inch rectangles, and 2 2.5 by 3.5-inch rectangles. So if you want to pause the video right now and go ahead and cut that background fabric, I'll let you do that. So go ahead and hit that pause button now, cut your fabric, and come on back. So we're now going to talk about the primary fabric. The primary fabric that we're using, which is going to make up the beauty of the pine cone, is going to be cut, of course, again, into 2.5-inch strips. Or if you have your jelly roll, you don't even have to worry about that. You're just going to cut them into 4 different sizes. And we're going to talk with letters here, just so we don't get confused. Letter A is going to be cut at 4.5-inch length. B is going to be cut at 6.5-inch. C at 8.5-inch, and D at 10.5-inch. All 2.5-inch width. So you have 4.5, 6.5, 8.5, and 10.5. So if you want to go ahead and cut that now, go ahead, hit the pause button, and join me back at the sewing machine because I'm going to show you how to piece these all together. Okay? See you back here in just a second. I hope you are at your sewing machines and you have all of your fabric cut at this point. So there's also one thing that you're going to need, and that will be an iron. I like to use a little handheld iron when I'm working at my sewing machine doing small pieces. And I have a really small cut and press that you can actually use on one side to cut fabric and one side to press on. This is just a small one. I don't need a big one for what I'm doing. I don't use this to cut, just to sew. I like to have it right here with me so I don't have to get up every time and run over to my sewing or my ironing table. So we're going to start off and we're going to take piece A and one of our 2.5-inch squares from our background fabric. And you're going to put them together just like this. Now, if both fabrics have a right side, you want to have right sides facing together. And you're going to piece them together, you're going to put them together just like this on top of each other. And we're going to sew a diagonal line from corner to corner across this block. If you don't trust yourself, you can actually draw a line from the corner to corner with a ruler to make sure you sew right on that line. Okay, so you're going to go ahead and put that in your sewing machine, and you're going to sew this corner to corner. We are making what are known as flying geese. Some of these are going to be a little bit longer than your normal flying geese, but this first one that we're making is actually our normal flying geese. So this is a very basic and common block to make, and it's used in very, very many different quilt patterns, and it's very versatile. It can be moved around, rearranged, and all that fun stuff. So once you have your first side sewn, what you want to do is you want to get your fabric scissors, and you want to actually cut off the bit on the end here. See how I've sewn this line here diagonally across? I'm going to cut this extra piece off, and I'm going to cut that off at about 1/4 of an inch away from my stitch line. And once I cut that off, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open this up, and you see now that I have a rectangle, but I have a corner here. This is half of my flying geese, and I'm going to take my iron and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to press this towards the background fabric. Okay, I'm going to press that towards the background fabric nice and flat. And once I have that flat, I'm going to just go ahead and I'm going to actually set that aside. We're going to do the same exact thing for B, C, and D. Okay, I'm going to show you one more time, and then you can do all 4 on your own. So first, again, you take your block, take the length of it down, take your background fabric. If there's a right side, make sure they're right sides together, and stitch a seam line along the background fabric from corner to corner. Again, drawing a line if you need to do that to keep yourself straight lined here. It's important you get a nice straight line from corner to corner, and then just go ahead and stitch down that line. And then once you stitch down that line, once again, you're going to go ahead and you're going to cut off that excess fabric from the side here, press it flat, and then do that for the other 2 pieces, and we'll meet back here again in just a moment. Welcome back. So now you should have 4 pieces that look like this, that have your primary fabric to your left and the background fabric to the right, all 3 pieces at all different lengths, or all 4 pieces at all 4 lengths. So now I'm going to show you how we're going to do the other side, because we're going to do it the same exact way. And the only thing with this, it's just you have to be very careful on how you sew your next stitch line on each of these, but most importantly with the very first one, because the very first one we're actually making your typical flying geese patch. So what you want to do here is you want to, again, take your fabric, and if your background fabric has a right and a wrong side, make sure you put the right sides together, lining them up with the side that's not sewn with the background onto it. And you're going to do a stitch line from the top left corner down to where the points meet on your main fabric. Just as simple as that. So I'm going to show you what we do. It's going to be the same exact thing. And my sewing machine has been giving me really bizarre issues. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use a leader on this just to work out any weird kinks, because it just for some reason likes to pull this fabric into itself. So, all right, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stitch down from that far corner all the way down to that point. And I'm going to stitch off. I'm going to just stitch right off that. I'm not going to stop before I get to the end. I'm just going to stitch right off. And then once I have that, I'm going to do the same thing I did with the other side. And I'm going to cut 1/4 of an inch away from that stitch line. And you want to make sure it's a nice good 1/4 of an inch. Anything bigger could be a little bulkier. Anything smaller could be a little bit difficult to work with. So now you have your first flying geese. And of course you want to go ahead and you want to press this, and you want to press this just like the other one towards the background fabric. So I'm just go ahead and now I'm going to press my seam open. When I press, I actually literally press. I don't swish, because you don't, if you move your iron around, you could end up stretching out the seam that you just created and causing it to bend, especially with these flying geese. It's very easy. So mine's perfect. Perfect, just like that. So you want to go ahead and stitch it just like that on all of the rest of your pieces. Just take your primary piece that has the main pattern and the background fabric, line it up to the top, and sew from the top left corner down to the center. Cut off the ends, press it flat just like we did with the other ones, and we'll meet right back here again as soon as we're done. All right. I have to stop right here for just a moment because you've probably realized, if you've been piecing along, that you have some extra green squares, probably two. That's because I completely forgot to tell you that you need two of the C strips, which is the 8.5 inch long ones. You need two of those. I apologize. But yeah, so that's why you have two extra pieces. And I didn't feel like going back and re-recording everything because I can't undo all of these stitches just for this. So I figured, I'm telling you here, none of us are perfect. I forgot to tell you about that extra C strip. There are two of those 8.5 inch strips. So that's why you have two extras. Well, I went ahead and I cut my extra and I sewed it all together. So you can see here, I'm kind of starting to piece it together. And as you can see, it's kind of looking like a Christmas tree if you put them all in the same way. But we're going to arrange this a little differently in just a moment because the strips need to be the same length. So we're going to add some more of our K strips. Actually, you might realize you have more than two, but you will realize if you didn't cut your extra C strip that you would have had two extra background squares. So yeah, so you should actually have a total of 5 strips. Okay, five strips total with the flying geese ends on all 5. So then from here, once you have all of that done and all of them pressed and all that fun stuff is all finished, we're going to go ahead and we're going to start piecing together the end strips with our other pre-cut background fabrics. If you were labeling them by letter, that would have been the last, I think it was E, F, and G. And so we're going to go ahead and take the first piece that we have, our 3.5 inch square. We're going to take two of those. Two of the 3.5 inch squares, and we're going to put them on the sides of our piece A, the very smallest piece. And we're going to, if they're again right sides together, and you're just going to piece on the short ends together on both sides, and again allowing a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And just do that on both sides. I don't press as I go on this portion because I'm going to press everything all at once. It's just easier for me to do that. But you should have a longer piece like that with your point. Actually, the way that we're going to be building our pine cones, it will be upside down. And that's how we're going to build these. If you want the tree, they'll be this way. The point's facing up. So you can set that aside. Now on the next piece on your B strip, okay, the B strip, I'm going to leave my strips here because I don't want to lose track of which one's A, B, C, and D. So your B strip, which is your second longest strip, you're going to attach two of your 2.5 inch squares, one on each end. So we're going to do that. Again, 1/4 inch seam allowance every time. And I'm going to go on both ends, just attach them there on the short ends, just like so. Make sure they're nice and squared off here. There we go. If you like to use pins, you can do that. To me, when I'm piecing like this, just small pieces, I don't use pins. It takes me longer to do that. I can just have it pieced real quick. And if I screw up the stitch, then I can just use my friendly little seam ripper. So there's my next one right there. And I'm just going to go ahead and continue on with that. On the next strip here for the third, so for the first strip, you're going to use the 3.5 inch rectangle. The second one, your 2.5 inch square. For the third one, you're going to, which is the letter C, your C strips, you're going to actually just use the 1.5 inch, the 1.5 inch strips, and you're going to attach those on each end of your C strips lengthwise. Make sure that they match across the length here, okay? They're real short when you're going to finish sewing them up. I'll show you real quick what that's going to look like once you have that sewn on, because it's just a really small piece of fabric just to give that little bit of an extension to match up with the other rows. So you'll have one on each side of that on both C strips. On your D strip, you actually don't need to add anything. That D strip is the perfect length as it is. And then you should be good to go. So once you get your L strips pieced onto your C strips, we're going to come right back here and we're going to go ahead and piece all of our rows together and make our acorn shape. So we're almost done. Not a difficult block. So go ahead, finish those up, show me back here. Okay, so I have the block assembled here so you can see how it would look as a pine cone. And you can see the top pointing down. You have your points, the first A strip with the points down on that, on B, on C, on D, and then C again on the bottom. So you have C on the third and fifth rows here. So this is the pine cone pattern, and all of your edges should line up and everything. You can square everything up if you want to. Each pine cone's block should measure about 10.5-inch squares. And if you want to make a lap quilt, you want to make 15 of these. And if you want to do a twin size, you would want to make 28 of these. That's your typical standard size for lap and twin. So now let's talk about some variations. Do you want to make a tree? Well, yeah, a tree can be cool. Just flip around the top, A, so you have a point. You're just basically going to flip them all around. B will flip. And then you're going to flip C underneath of that. And then D. Now, you will have an extra strip left over, so if you want to, you could just go ahead and put that right under C on the other one, and it still works out really nicely. So, flip it around. So it still works out real nice like that. So you still have your tree effect as well. So that's another layout that you can do. So if you're using Christmas type of fabric, you can make this like a Christmas tree. And you can even applique on some Christmas ornaments onto the patch as well. So all you need to do next is just take each of these and sew them all each row together. You just take B and make sure they're right sides together, put A over top of that, sew it along. So if you want to do the tree, this is the layout you want. And if you want the pine cone, make sure you have your second C row on the bottom. Make sure all points of all pieces are facing down. And that would be your pine cone. So then you would just flip A over B, sew along that seam line, and then take that whole thing, B over C, sew that, and then you have your rows. I'm going to go ahead and do that. We'll meet back here when I'm finished, and I'll show you what the block looks like in the end. Okay, so we made our first block together for a quilt. That's pretty awesome. Here's what mine looks like. Look at that. Little pine cone. Nice 10.5-inch block, very easy, really nice, really pretty. You can do all kinds of things with it. If you take another one, you can put it right underneath, but upside down. And that gives it a really neat, like a Amish style type of look to it. You can do all kinds of neat different layouts with these as well. You don't even have to put them up this side up or this side. You can put them sideways if you wanted to. So you can do all kinds of stuff with these. They're really, really easy. So you learned how to do flying geese today as well. That's pretty cool. So I want to see what you guys did. I want to see your fabrics on your patterns because I love fabric so much. I want to see what you picked. So if you enjoyed today, if you learned something, if you had some fun, I don't know, if you want to learn something else, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. You'll be notified. And hit that like button as well if you enjoyed today's program. So I appreciate you stopping by the Seam Stream. I try and do every week, every 2 weeks at the most, or at the least, I should say. With the holidays, I hadn't done anything, but I'm back. So, yay! We're going to do some quilt blocks, and we're going to learn all kinds of fun stuff coming ahead. So I think we're going to focus more on the blocks going forward for a little bit, because they're really cool. I'm learning a lot myself, so I think it'd be fun to learn together. But I want to see what you did. So if you have any projects you're working on, and if you have made this before in a quilt, I would love to see those pictures. Go ahead and comment below. Hit the bell icon if you want notifications of whenever a new video is posted. And I really hope to see you again at the Seam Stream. Thank you so much for joining me, and have a wonderful and happy and safe 2021. Happy New Year, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.